Today is June 28th, 2019. I'm going to do a tea making video. Since it's for my nephews, I'm going to tell a little bit of my tea history. And here we go. Now, when I was younger, in the 70s, I had a sister who, well, that was the time of hippies. And not that she was a hippie, but the Jesus movement had hit the church, and there were a lot of hippies that were coming to Jesus. And Nicky Cruz, crossing the switchblade, he had just come to Jesus not too long earlier, and my dad did a couple of conferences with him. But anyway, in that time period, we didn't drink tea really. If we drank tea, it was iced tea, which means ground up leaves and you just put it into cold water. And my sister had the concept from somewhere that you would make sun tea. And she took, I don't know, a gallon, 2 gallon, maybe it was a 5-gallon jar. And she put Lipton tea, not the small packets, but large Lipton tea packets into water and put it out in the sun. And so as a kid, as a young, 5-year-old, kindergarten, first grade, this was my introduction to tea. Lipton tea out in the sun, leaving it out there for a day or two to make sun tea, and instant tea. Now, needless to say, those are terrible tea concepts. Of course, most Americans grow up drinking coffee. In my family, my dad was a preacher, so my mom and my dad at one point, I guess they were trying to stop drinking coffee, and all the coffee sermons were going around the house and around the church, how bad coffee is for you. And of course, we always listened to the preachers on the radios, and anyway, there for a period, I had it in my head that coffee was bad. And so, of course, I don't like to drink the taste of coffee, and so that is a drink I have forsaken. It was like a sin. It was like eating pork meat for the Jews or the Muslims. You didn't eat pig because it's bad. Well, anyway, so that was my coffee take when I was young, and I got it in my mind I wouldn't drink coffee, and that's a great thing. But when I graduated college, a civil engineering degree from Rolla, I went into the Peace Corps. I've always had a heart for missions, and somehow I guess those Peace Corps commercials got me as a kid. But anyway, I had it that, hey, that'd be a great thing to do, to join the Peace Corps. And so I was off, and I didn't know where I needed to go, but they sent me to Kenya. Now, one thing about Africa is that, now this was like 85, 86, 87, and the one thing they teach you is that, hey, don't drink the water. Literally, don't drink the water unless you boil it. Now, sodas were just fine. The water that they used to make soda pop and things, it wasn't going to kill you, and you wanted to boil the water. So, since Kenya was an English colony at one point some years ago, tea drinking was huge. In fact, some of the best tea in the world is the Kenyan tea from their, if you ever get a chance to get some Kenyan tea. Even the stuff they sell to the public is so fresh and so good over in Kenya that their cheap tea is better than our most expensive tea. But anyway, maybe I'm biased. Well, I am. So I lucked into knowing, one, that you boiled the water. Now, I did it for health reasons, and so I was getting the tea making correct in Kenya. Now, in Kenya, you had to use open flame. At that point, they didn't have these electric kettles that boiled the water and then turned itself off. Now, some years later, I was doing some world traveling, and I ended up in Oban, Scotland, at this youth hostel. And this is about 2000. So I was picking up tea drinking again. I had come back and stopped, you know, and then traveling, you always want boiled water. So anyway, I was drinking tea on this trip, and I was watching this person make tea in this little hostel kitchen, and they had this kettle that they clicked down, and then it turned itself off. And I took note, and so I put some water in the kettle, and it turned itself off. And I thought that was the greatest thing in the world. You didn't have to watch it boil or anything, and all of a sudden you had boiling hot water, and the kettle wouldn't overboil. And so I came back from the States, and I searched and searched all the stores at that time. Now, it was only at Bed Bath & Beyond where I found my first automatic kettle that turns itself off. You know, it's a tea kettle. But at that time in the States, it wasn't common. It wasn't a common thing to have in the houses, because most people, I guess, they use tea percolators and stuff. Anyway, we had a different, not coffee percolators. We weren't really big into tea so much. Even then, Americans, well, even today, Americans may be backwards on making tea. So don't be hard on us. We make coffee. And so I'm doing this video. I'm giving a little bit of history. So at that point, I started to give these kettles, these automatic kettles, for wedding presents. That became, it's still, if I go to a wedding, which I don't go to many, but anyway, that's still one of the gifts I tend to give for wedding gifts, because it's, there's still people that won't have them. So anyway, that's the history. I hope you've enjoyed it, giving some backwards thoughts on making tea. And now I'm going to give you some good thoughts on making tea. Here's my tea kettle. You can get them at all different prices here in the States these days. Now that's pretty common. You can get them at Walmart. But that's full of water. Now I always go to bed with my tea kettle full of water if possible. You know, if you have a water break or something, at least you'll have a liter or two of water ready to go while they'll fix it. So the thing about making tea in America is that the electricity is 110. So it's slow. What that means is that it's going to take a while for this water to boil. And of course you never want to watch water boil, because it never boils. So this will actually take a few minutes. It's like double the time at least that, like if you were in other parts of the world where 210 or 220 is their standard voltage, their tea kettles will boil so much quicker. So you got to be, I have to be patient. And you could always go to open heat and use the, but here, this is my tea kettle of choice these days. It's a nice big one. Now, when I make tea, I also, right now I'm making such excellent tea, I'll put it in the fridge afterward. Like if I don't drink it all, of course, in the morning, after you've had a few cups of tea, I'll drink this whole pot, is what I'm trying to say. But it's also nice for me to take the tea. Now, some tea, if you let it trouble making this video. My neighbor's dog is wanting to whine and bark. So if you're hearing a whining or a barking, that's well, that's life. So here's a couple of tea kettles. I tend to go with stainless steel. You know, it's not breakable, and you can. And I also like to use here a cozy. Now this is a great thing. It goes over the top of your tea kettle and keeps everything hot for hours. And that's pretty awesome. So here, I've already boiled this. It should turn off real quick now. So this is the end. Now the key to making good tea is, of course, having good tea leaves, but also boiling water. Not just hot. Now, I've had a friend from Australia order tea at a restaurant, and they come out with a bag of Lipton tea in hot water from just the tap. Nowhere near boiling water. I mean, that's the skill levels of a lot of Americans, and a lot of even our restaurants, where we are skillless. We don't understand a lot of times. Of course, there's been a lot more traveling overseas, and a lot of missionaries and a lot of illegals and foreigners have come in who know how to make tea. So it's more popular these days. Even in America, you see the teas increase. Of course, the Oriental love to make tea, and we have a lot of Chinese and Vietnamese in America. So the key, a pot. Now, a lot of times, not necessary, but when you have a big stainless steel pot. Now, whenever you're traveling, you want to get into the habit of making tea or coffee just for the sake of, here, let's see. Let's get a cup. This is now one of my favorite cups. This is, here, that teacup is pretty, can you see the light? That's a nice cup. And I have some Irish cups. Where's my Irish cup at? Here. This for years was one of my favorite cups. I bought that in Ireland. You see the Celtic designs from the Book of Kells? Anyway, that's one of my favorite cups. Okay, but I like that you can see the tea through this. So sometimes well, pretty much all the time, especially if it's winter, I'll put a little bit of boiling water to heat up my pot. And usually, well, I didn't use much that time. So, key, boiling hot water. So now this is a little bit, the edge of coolness has been knocked out of it. Now I'm using loose leaf. Now that's not a bad tea, but the tea that's inside this tin is not that. I'm using the tin for other purposes. The tea I'm using here is, at the moment, you go back and forth. I'm using, this is peach tea, they call it. Now, I'm not sure how they make it, for sure. But I bought this down at Planters. And this is 8 ounces, half pound. You know, the more you buy, the better the price. But anyway, loose tea is the best. Now, if you're going to have other teas, this is a good... Here. You won't find this in America too often. But this Yorkshire... There. Can you see it? The Yorkshire Gold is a real good tea. The English breakfast teas are good. They're a nice tea. This isn't too bad of tea. Bigelow English time. Here, let me show you some teas. Now, I have taken the tea boxes and put it up on my wall for art. But the Yorkshire tea, I just was showing you that's a nice tea. A friend of mine, when I was in Israel, gave me a big box of it. He was trying to stop drinking tea. John was his name. Anyway, and another friend said, well, I'll give him a month or two. And he was right. He's drinking tea again. Tetley's. This is a workhorse tea, and you can find Tetley around the United States these days. It's a good tea. It's a British blend is the one that I like. But Tetley is a workhorse tea for the UK. Now, Barry's tea is kind of a Irish name, Irish brand. It's a good tea. All of the berry teas are good. Yoko, that's not too bad of tea. This is from South Africa. At least that's where I bought it. Another berries and Bigelow. So that's pretty much my boxes. I've got, and this 5 Rose tea, that's also I bought in South Africa. Now, I don't have any Kenyan tea boxes and stuff. That was too long ago, and I didn't keep those packages. But the Kenyan tea, in my book, is the best teas in the world. So this is more of a history of making tea. I hope you guys are enjoying it. If you've come to this part, you're probably family still. But anyway, for loose leaf, of course, loose leaf is always the best tea in the end if you can get it. And a lot of tea comes in bags and stuff, but the loose leaf is the best. Now I'll put, right now what I'm doing is I'll do 2 full small teaspoons of tea in here, at least 2. And if I'm not adding any other tea, so that's about how much tea I'll put in. And you can put in as much or as little as you like, you know. And then right now, I'm adding a English thyme tea to go in there. I'm going to add some cinnamon, not too much, and you guys can figure out how much is too much for you. I put 3 for this large container. That's, you know, 1.5 liters at least. I add maybe 2 or 3 dashes, well, actually 3 dashes of cinnamon for me. And the other thing I put in is mint. And I have a whole bunch of mints. I think this is orange mint. But I'll put up to 3 leaves. You don't want to put too much mint unless you're making mint tea. It'll overwhelm the tea if you have too much mint. So I try to limit to 3 leaves. Since my basil is supposed to be good for you and it's in full leaf, I will add, now this stuff isn't necessary. These are extras, but I'll add a basil leaf, I'll add some mint, I'll add cinnamon, and the last thing I add in this jar is dried up dandelion roots. So I always add 1 dandelion root. If I have fresh, if I've just dug it up, that's better. So here, let me get all that stuff put in there. So here we have, I've got 1 bag of this Bigelow English thyme tea. Now I found out that English thyme tea, at least yesterday, if you leave it in there too long, you know, like 3 hours, the English thyme seems to go bitter. But the the peach tea doesn't go bitter. So today I'll make a point of watching that English thyme tea and removing the bag after an hour or so. Now you need to let it brew. There's the word, brew. You need to let it brew for at least 3 minutes. And when you're letting it brew, it's good, to put a cozy over it. So that's how you make tea. The The secret, of course, is good tea. Now, the other thing that, do you see this? Most people in the world, when they make tea, they leave it loose in the pot, and then they strain it with a strainer, a fine strainer like this, or similar, you know, in design. This one is easy. From both ends you can put it on a hook and let it just sit there. And those you know, they're always trying to sell contraptions. The other day we were down at the store and they were trying to sell something like this. Can you see that? Useless in my book. One, it keeps the tea from really, you know, being all it can be, because tea will expand. Loose leaf tea expands. That's part of the reason why it does so much better than the tea in a bag. You know, it's not confined and the water flows around it better. Anyway, useless. My nephew's about to buy one. I said, don't buy that. So I have a couple of these. I never use them. And maybe I'll find some reason to use them for something someday. But not for tea. So, you want just a standard sieve, strainer, and that's it. And you just pour the tea through, and I'll show you here in a second. Okay, about a minute has gone by or so, maybe two. Not too long, but I'm in a bit of a hurry. Sorry, guys. So, you let it brew, and since I have quite a bit of tea in there, it should be okay. Let's see. Now, this is why I like the glass container these days. Now, that's not a really dark tea. If I let it set longer, that tea will get a bit darker, but that's not too bad. Now, for me, when I'm drinking tea, if I'm drinking it hot, here, see, just one hand. But you see the sieve, there's not really any tea leaf that came out in there. So we got a nice tea. Now I always add milk and sugar to my tea. So, and I'll show you that in a second. I'll add maybe 1 teaspoon. Of course, kids will like 2 or 3. And I always keep my sugar in a container. Now, this used to be a container for peanut butter. But I tell you, if you keep it in a container with a nice tight lid, bugs don't get into it. And also, if you drop it, you won't spill it. But it's a good way to minimize bugs in your kitchen, at least in my life. And I'm not the best a housekeeper. So, Lord, take the little tips. But anyway, and these, I'm selling peanut butter in America. The peanut butter jars, some of the thickest plastics. If you clean them out nicely, of course they may smell a little like peanut butter initially, but I like peanut butter. But the container is a really strong container. Now, if I don't drink all the tea when it's hot, I will put it into a bottle. Now, and then I'll put it in the fridge. Now, this one's actually pretty dark. That tea, look how dark that is. So that's a pretty dark tea. And if you're in like Turkey, they will brew up tea a lot darker than this. And what you're supposed to do in Turkey is add hot water to the tea until you like the color. So they'll make it super hot, super dark in the restaurants, but then they also have hot water to add to it. Now here, this one's a little bit, you can see the color. I like it a little bit darker than this, but that's not too bad color-wise. Now what I'll do is I'll add honey to these, and I put them in the fridge. Now this is for cold, my cold tea, and it's pretty nice. And it's this tea here which I'm brewing up now. And here, let me get some milk. Since I learned to drink tea in Kenya, which was a British colony, the Brits like to put a little bit of milk into their tea. And that is about the correct color. You just put a little bit of milk. There. Okay, that's how you make tea. Now this will be real hot. This is boiling hot. Let's see, can we get the color right? I'm sorry, the lighting is a bit... But that kind of a nice milk chocolate color, that, let's taste it. Excuse me. Now, of course, if you're making tea for kids, you want to add some ice to it and cool it down quicker, or either you want to make it half milk and half tea, and that'll cool it down. But you have to make sure you don't burn the mouth of kids. Most adults are smart enough to know to sip because, you know, coffee and stuff. Okay, that's tea making. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I know it's a bit long, but since it was for family, I wanted to add some stories.